recognising the importance of suitable homes for older and disabled people. I'll be delighted to meet with her.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Gary Sambrook.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Gary Sambrook.
Mr. Speaker, we need to build more homes on brownfield sites, but we also need to make sure that the houses that we've got are of a decent standard. In estates across my Birmingham constituency, in Kings Norton, the Free Estates, Weedy Castle and Frankley, we need investment to make sure that those estates have decent homes. And so does the Prime Minister agree with me that by improving homes, it will help level up our economy and deliver for working class communities like mine?
Well, my honourable friend is spot on, and he'll be hearing more about that in just half an hour's time, but he is quite right that we should be building on brownfield sites and building the beautiful homes that people actually want.
Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts are with the loved ones of those who have sadly died after contracting the coronavirus and those that are still suffering from the disease, including the Honourable Member for Mid-Bedfordshire. I want once again to pay tribute to our medical staff working so hard to combat the spread of this disease and care for those affected. And I think we should all express our gratitude to the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor, who have shown exceptional leadership throughout, and we will continue to follow their advice. Mr. Speaker, Sunday was International Women's Day, a day when we celebrate the achievements of women around the world, recognises the advances made in working towards a goal of gender equality, and most importantly, reflect on how far we have to go to achieve that. A quarter of social care workers, who are overwhelmingly women, are on 0 hours contracts. It's essential care workers self-isolate if they experience symptoms of coronavirus, but many may feel they have no choice but to continue working. Will the Prime Minister finally bring in emergency legislation to guarantee sick pay for 0 hours workers to help contain the spread of the virus?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will wish to join the Right Honourable Gentleman in wishing my honourable friend, the Minister for Mental Health, a speedy recovery. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that having talked to her, I know that she will make one. I know, Mr. Speaker, you issued a letter to everybody across the parliamentary estate. And as you say in your letter, Mr. Speaker, we will be guided by Public Health England in our response to this situation, and they are also providing guidance to honourable members and to their offices. And as the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, in just a few minutes we will be hearing from my Right Honourable friend the Chancellor about what measures we are taking to protect everybody. As he knows, we've already brought forward statutory sick pay from day 4 to day 1, but for those who are on all types of contracts, we will ensure that they get the protection that they need, and nobody who does the right thing by staying at home is penalised.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I hope that legislation comes rapidly, and it does guarantee that people don't have to make a choice between spreading the virus because they have to go to work or staying at home and self-isolate, as obviously they should do if they've got the symptoms. Can the Prime Minister explain why, according to a report by the Institute of Health Equity, life expectancy has gone down for the poorest women in our society?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, overall life expectancy stands at its highest level, but I will not, highest level, which is, and a tribute to the consistent work of this government and others, but it is absolutely true that there are too many instances and too many parts of the country where we are seeing life expectancy not rise in the way that we would like. And it is true that there are parts of this country where 1 in 50, for instance, pregnant women are smokers, and parts of the country where only 1 in 4 pregnant women are smokers. And what we want to see is a uniting and a levelling up across this whole country. That's why we're putting record sums, £12 billion into public health, Mr. Speaker. That's why this is the government, this is the party of the NHS that is now putting record investment into our NHS precisely for that purpose.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I don't think the Prime Minister answered my question. And it's no surprise, Mr. Speaker, that life expectancy has gone down when 86% of the cuts made by successive Tory governments have landed disproportionately on the shoulders of women. We are one of the richest countries in the world, and it's mind-boggling that life expectancy should be falling in this country. Mr. Speaker, for the poorest people in our society, life expectancy is falling. The government should have an answer to that. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister supports the absolutely horrendous rape clause in the child tax credit rules. Why does he think it's right that 200 mothers have to prove to the government their child was conceived as a result of being raped so they can keep their child tax credits?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to correct a point he's just made earlier. It is, I'm afraid, the case, as has been revealed just in the last few days, that mortality is at its lowest level in this country since 2001. And on his since 2001. And on his point about recipients of benefit, it is obviously that he draws attention to an injustice, and we will do everything that we can to rectify it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I would hope that means the Prime Minister is going to introduce regulations to end the two-child policy and the benefit strategy, because that is exactly what happens when women who are victims of rape have to prove they've been raped in order to get benefits for their child. 50 years ago, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Minister Barbara Castle introduced the Equal Pay Act. But women are still paid 17% less than men. And under this government, the gender pay gap is estimated to take another 60 years to close. Why hasn't the Prime Minister followed Labour's lead and set a target for closing it by 2030?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only are there now record women in employment in this country, but the gender pay gap is at a record low. And it was this Conservative government that made sure the companies had to report on the gender pay gap, Mr. Speaker.
Jeremy Corbyn.
17% gap. It is too big, too wide, and should be closed, and the government should do something about it. Mr. Speaker, every fortnight, 3 women are killed by their partner or ex-partner. Domestic violence is only likely to increase if large numbers of people are having to self-isolate. 10 years of austerity has denied councils the funding they need to support victims of domestic abuse. Will he commit to the extra £173 million needed every year to ensure that survivors get the support they so desperately need?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've just put record funding back into councils to support them in all their responsibilities. We are committed to, when he talks of domestic abuse, we're committed to bringing forward a victims' law to guarantee victims' rights, and this government has an outstanding record of tackling violence against women and girls, and that is why we are now taking forward in this Parliament our landmark domestic abuse bill.
Funding the domestic abuse bill will simply be a piece of paper. There has to be funding to ensure that those who are victims of domestic violence get the support they need in the centres they need that are underfunded by his government. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made repeated offensive remarks against single mothers and their children. Yes, and he described them as ill-raised, ignorant, aggressive and illegitimate. Against Muslim women, saying they look like bank robbers. Against working women, suggesting the best way of dealing with advice from a female colleague is just to pat her on the bottom and send her on her way. Words have consequences. His offensive words are backed up with offensive and discriminatory policies, from the rape clause to dismantling local services which women, particularly BAME and disabled women, disproportionately rely on. Can the Prime Minister apologise for his offensive comments and ensure that these discriminatory policies are reversed by his government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of what this government has done to promote the rights of women. I'm proud that we have a record number of female MPs in our party today. I'm proud that this is the only party that has produced 2 female, not 1 but 2 female Prime Ministers. be an extraordinary and amazing thing, Mr. Speaker?
Still waiting.
Wouldn't it be an amazing thing if that party were to produce a female leader of their own? Don't hold your breath, Mr. Speaker. And I will take no lessons. I will take no lessons in sexism from a party where good female MPs are bullied out of their party. Just because they've had the guts to stand up against the climate of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, I know is a great champion of the countryside and farming, and the great benefit it has both from producing high animal welfare food and also the amount of carbon that's held in the soil through permanent pasture. In our Conservative manifesto, we stated on page 57, in our trade negotiations we will not compromise our high environmental protection and animal welfare and food standards. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and other colleagues with rural farming constituencies to discuss how to support farmers and growers in trade deals to provide them with more opportunity to produce even more food under high animal and environmental welfare?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We will not compromise on animal welfare. We will not compromise on food standards and hygiene. I'm only too happy to meet him and his fellow farmers to discuss the opportunities ahead.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the numbers infected by the coronavirus grow, the level of public concern naturally grows with this. Last week, the Prime Minister gave me a firm reassurance that no one would be financially penalised for following health advice. And yet, still millions of self-employed workers have been left in deep uncertainty as to what financial help they will be given if they are forced to stop working. In this House, Mr. Speaker, we are in a privileged position. We will not be financially worse off. Millions of workers are not in that privileged position. They may be forced to rely on social security for an extended period because of this virus. So for the record, can the Prime Minister tell me what the statutory sick rate in Ireland is compared to his UK government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is not my duty to comment on the pay rates of other countries. What I can tell you, what I can tell the honourable member, which he knows very well, which he knows very well, is that we, under this government, have already advanced statutory sick pay from day 4 to day 1. We will make sure that those on universal credit and other benefits get the help that they need from day 1. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, if he can contain his impatience for just a little bit, will be telling him more about what we are doing to protect everybody in this society, to make sure that everybody is not penalised for doing the right thing.
Ian Blackford.
Well, let me try and help the Prime Minister and perhaps inform him of the detail. In Ireland, in response to the coronavirus, the government has just raised their statutory sick rate to the equivalent of £266 per week. This covers those employed and those in self-employment. In Germany and Austria, it's £287. In Sweden, it's £230. In the Netherlands, £201, and in Spain, it's £121. Whereas in the UK, Prime Minister, it's a meagre £94.25 per week.
I live on that.
Prime Minister, up to 80% of people across the United Kingdom could face infection in the weeks and months ahead. Many of them will be forced to rely on statutory sick pay. If the Prime Minister is truly committed to levelling up, a good place to start must be statutory sick pay. Will he take the opportunity to stand up today and commit to raising the UK payment to the average EU level?
Mr. Speaker, as I think most members of the House understand, the UK is distinct from many other countries around the world and certainly in the EU. And we have a universal free health system, free at the point of delivery. We have an extensive benefit system, free for people across this country. And indeed, our health system is very well managed, very well prepared for this epidemic. And I congratulate everybody in the NHS responsible for making the preparations that they have.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I had the pleasure of visiting Burnley Hospital to see a demonstration of an advanced surgical robot. which represents a leap forward in the health provision in my constituency. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that technological advances in the NHS is paramount to providing the best level of patient care? And will he agree to work with me to keep Burnley at the cutting edge of those health revolution?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and that's why my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, and I are determined to advance robot technology, AI, in the NHS. We put in another £200 million, and in his own area, the NHS East Lancashire is receiving over £500 million more, a cash increase of nearly 5% on last year.
Alex Davies-Jones.
Mr. Speaker, a month ago I asked the Prime Minister about his plans to tackle the crisis in recruiting overseas consultants to work in our overstretched NHS. The Prime Minister dodges the truth, claiming it's devolved, when visas are clearly an immigration issue for his UK Home Office. So, second time lucky, can the Prime Minister today confirm exactly what steps he's taking to ensure that overseas consultants will apply for NHS visas to work in all of our hospitals?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can't remember whether I said this to her last time, but that's why we've introduced a fast-track NHS visa.
Dr. Julian Lewis-Club.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker, on war widows.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has made this point to me in person. I've heard from the war widows themselves about their own concerns. The Ministry of Defence is looking at what can be done to provide meaningful support to those who have lost their loved ones.
Julian Lewis.
Given that the previous Defence Secretary sought and was refused permission from the Treasury to help the estimated 265 war widows whose pensions were cancelled when they remarried and can be permanently restored only by their going through a divorce and remarriage to their second husbands, will the Prime Minister personally meet Moira Kane and Mary Morland of the War Widows Association finally to put an end to this deplorable and dishonourable situation?
Mr. Speaker, the MOD is looking at this very problem, and I'm conscious of the issue that he raises. It's been raised with me. I've asked my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Defence, to meet the chairman of the War Widows Association to discuss further what we can do.
That's Shaw. That's Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, last week Emmy Award-winning actor and musician Riz Ahmed released a hard-hitting new album and the short film The Long Goodbye, which powerfully expresses the heartbreak of many British minorities of feeling unwanted in Britain, where hate crime is rising and hate speech infects public life. These are also the concerns of Muslims in my constituency. I urge members of the House to listen to it and watch it. So could the Prime Minister, and for once, without hiding behind the robes of his Muslim ancestors, yes, we all know he has them, or clinging to the fig leaf that his ex-Chancellor's presence in the Cabinet provided him, or resorting to the potentially divisive tit-for-tat deflection of a very serious issue, which is anti-Semitism, 300 complaints of Islamophobia within his party. Can he simply assure me what he is doing to assure Britain's Muslims that their Prime Minister is not an Islamophobe, take their concerns?
Order. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can reassure her there's absolutely no room for hatred or racism in this party, in our Conservative Party, and I wish I could say the same of her own party.
Congratulate my right honourable friend on the news that he and Carrie are expecting their first child. All parents want the best start in life for their children. With the UK lagging behind the rest of the world in the number of diseases that we test, genetic tests, we only test for 9 genetic conditions in this country. Do you agree with me, and will you support my campaign calling for a review of the newborn baby screening programme?
The Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she raises a very important point. I'm glad that starting this year, screening for babies with severe combined immunodeficiency will be evaluated for inclusion in screening. But my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, says he's more than willing to meet her to discuss further what screening, how screening could be improved.
Howell Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And further to the questions posed by my right honourable friend, leader of the SNP, irrespective of what other countries are doing, policy in this country is his responsibility. So what is he going to do to help the self-employed in this coronavirus crisis?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and what we are going to do, obviously, is to ensure that nobody is penalised for doing the right thing. Everybody has access to the benefits and the support that they need. And if he will contain himself, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be setting out more in just a minute.
Jane Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister join with me in congratulating the mighty Loughborough swim team for their 5 gold medal haul at the McCullough International Open Meet last month? The swimmers involved were Luke Greenbank, James Wilby, Abby Wood, Max Litchfield and Molly Renshaw, surely the very epicentre of sporting excellence in London.
Having worked with Loughborough University on the Olympics on their fantastic site in East London, I know their formidable global reputation. I have no hesitation in congratulating Loughborough swimming team on her behalf.
Pete Wishart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister explain to me why he is so singularly unpopular in Scotland? He's lost half the Scottish MPs. Support for independence is at an all-time high. Is it because he thinks he can say no to a nation? Or is it because the blustering buffoonery just jars with the Scottish people?
Mr. Speaker, I notice that support for breaking up the union is actually declining in Scotland. And maybe that's because they have a Scottish Nationalist Party in charge that has the highest taxes anywhere in the United Kingdom, that is failing Scottish children in their schools, and that is not running the Scottish health service in the way that it should. And maybe his bluff and bluster is covering up for the abject failures of the Scottish Nationalist government. And maybe, Mr. Speaker, the Scottish Nationalists should stick to the day job.
As the country that brought railways to the world, what plans does my right honourable friend have to celebrate their 200th anniversary in 2025? And does he stand with the people of Darlington to prevent the removal of locomotion number 1, the world's first passenger steam engine, from Darlington, where she has resided for over 160 years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate my honourable friend and the people of Darlington, the historic role they've played in our railway history and heritage, and I will do what I can to support his campaign to prevent Darlington from being despoiled of that iconic locomotive number 1.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The week before Christmas, Luton Food Bank issued 339 food parcels, of which 124 were specifically for children. Child poverty in Luton has risen to a shameful 46%. So while Luton's unemployment rate may be going down, more people are in low-paid, insecure jobs. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that it is wholly unacceptable that families are in work but children are growing up in poverty? And will he commit to ending poverty pay?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, not only are we cutting national insurance contributions for everybody, whatever their pay, but of course we're also lifting up the national living wage by the biggest ever increase, which will benefit people across this country to the tune of £4,000 a year. This is a one-nation government looking first at the needs of the poorest families in this country.
My honourable friend from Norfolk makes the case for Birmingham, but in the West Midlands, over 31,000 new homes have been built since Andy Street became our mess. Smashing his own target of 25,000 new homes, the vast majority have been built on derelict brownfield sites. Will the Prime Minister support me to ensure we keep the focus on the regeneration and remediation of brownfield sites?
Yes, I congratulate Andy Street on what he's doing, his fantastic record of home. It is always the Conservatives who build the homes, Mr. Speaker, and this House will be hearing more in just a few minutes about what we intend to do to give everybody in this country, every young person in this country, the chance to own their own home.
Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this current financial year, this government has redistributed funding meant for veterans' charities. This has resulted in severely reduced services by Combat Stress, a renowned mental health charity serving veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. It has also meant a reduction of 24 to 10 beds in our residential unit in my constituency and the loss of 50 jobs. Will the Prime Minister show his support for veterans' mental health today by initiating an urgent review of this redistribution of this critical funding to stop those lives changing and often life-saving services being lost?
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right to raise the issue of veterans and their needs, and that's why this government appointed a Minister for Veterans and a Veterans Task Force, a special unit in the Cabinet Office, and he will be hearing a little bit more in just a few minutes about what further steps we intend to take to protect and promote the rights of veterans.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that this budget today is a historic moment to level up our economy and ensure that everyone has the opportunity to succeed, especially in Stoke-on-Trent?
Mr. Speaker, Stoke-on-Trent is the crucible in which the future of this country is going to be forged, as it has been in the past, and it could not have a more doughty or more valiant advocate. And I agree entirely with what he said.
It's vital that the funds announced this morning are distributed effectively to the businesses and self-employed people affected by coronavirus. But the banks must fulfil their responsibilities as well. Businesses are telling me that some banks are shoring up their balance sheets at the expense of their business customers and their workforce.
We know what happened.
So will the Prime Minister make sure that banks which were bailed out by the taxpayer now play their part in supporting businesses and their workers in their hour of need?
Prime Minister.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raises an important point, and he'll have seen what the Governor of the Bank of England has done to the cost of borrowing overall today. But my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will indeed be meeting the banks continuously to ensure that they look after the interests of all our people.
Hey, Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rural areas like my constituency of Brecon and Radnorshire are at the bottom of the pile when it comes to broadband connectivity and mobile phone signal. Can my right honourable friend confirm that this government's £1 billion deal with mobile phone providers will boost 4G right across the country, especially mid-Wales?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and you'll hear something to our advantage in just a few minutes.
Bill Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, a range of expert mental health organisations, including the Royal College of Psychiatrists, Mind and Rethink Mental Health, have called for an urgent inquiry into avoidable deaths linked to failures in the UK social security system. A family in my constituency lost their father and husband to suicide in these similar circumstances, and they, like too many others, want answers. So when will the Prime Minister instruct such an inquiry to listen to those families and the experts in this case?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are indeed some very hard cases and some very tragic outcomes, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, is indeed looking at that and very, very happy to work with the honourable gentleman to make sure that such tragic cases, the families' needs are met.
I would.
Mr. Speaker, according to The Economist, over the past 5 years, salaries in Dudley have risen faster than anywhere else in the country. As part of his levelling up agenda, will the Prime Minister work with Andy Street to ensure that the West Midlands continues to get the investment in skills and infrastructure it needs to power the Midland engine?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think I can be accused of anticipating the budget excessively when I say that there is about to be an infrastructure revolution in this country, which will help to benefit, amongst other things, the West Midlands and Dudley in particular.
Zara Sultana.
Like the honourable member before me, statutory sick pay in the UK is amongst the lowest in Europe. It's less than £95 a week. If the Prime Minister doesn't think he can live on it, he shouldn't expect our constituents to live on it too. So I urge him, act before it's too late and introduce decent sick pay for every worker in Britain.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've answered the right honourable gentleman earlier on. We will do everything we can to ensure that people get protected throughout this outbreak and nobody is penalised for doing the right thing.
Liz Saxby.
Does my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, agree with me that the Great South West offers a fantastic opportunity to become the first region to not just become net zero, but net negative? And can he assure me that this will be a top priority in the levelling up agenda?
Mr. Speaker, there are over 400,000 jobs already in the low-carbon economy in this country, and the Great South West is going to play a leading role in the green revolution of the future.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Shetland Space Centre, a limited company in my constituency, is working in partnership with Lockheed Martin to build a sustainable space economy in Shetland. Can the Prime Minister give me some assurance that the very welcome government support for the space industry will be allowed to follow what is the best commercial and technical options, and that companies like Lockheed Martin are the people best placed to make these judgments?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will of course be guided by the best scientific judgments in all these things, but I can certainly confirm it is our firm determination to have a second spaceport in Scotland, and we're looking for candidates to send into orbit, Mr. Speaker.
Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is the 15th annual day in memory of victims of terrorism across Europe. Next week in my constituency of Warrington South, we'll commemorate the 27th anniversary of the IRA terrorist attack in my town, which killed 2 children. Over the last quarter of a century, the Peace Foundation, based in Warrington, has worked tirelessly to provide the National Support Service for victims of terrorism in Great Britain. Will the Prime Minister join with me in commending their work and in agreeing to ensure their funding continues?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I certainly commend the work of all those who are working on the Warrington Peace Centre, and we will do everything we can to ensure that funding continues.
Sir Davies.
I associate my party with the good wishes for the Honourable Member for Mid Bedfordshire, and indeed anyone who's contracted coronavirus. And on coronavirus, can I welcome the fact the government is listening to experts? But, Mr. Speaker, given the NHS has to face the coronavirus challenge with a record shortage of nurses, and the care sector with over 120,000 vacancies, does the Prime Minister not agree that the 3 Conservative governments since 2015 should have fixed the roof when the sun was shining?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I seem to think that he was in that government, but leaving that point on one side, there are now actually a record number of doctors and nurses in our fantastic NHS. There are 8,700 more nurses this year than last year, and we are recruiting another 50,000 more, and you'll be hearing more about what we're doing to support the NHS in just a minute.
We now come to a presentation of bills. Sarah Olney.
Protest abortion clinics bill.
Second reading what day?
26th of June.
26th of June. Helena, all yours. Good luck. No points of order.
Order. Before I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I must remind honourable members that copies of the budget resolutions will be available in the vote office at the end of the Chancellor's statement. I also remind honourable members, that's good, we have some quiet, that interventions are not going to be taken during the Chancellor's statement, or indeed during the reply by the Leader of the Opposition, or even during the reply of the Leader of the Scottish National Party. It gives me great pleasure to call to deliver his budget statement, Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to get straight to the issue most on everyone's mind: coronavirus COVID-19. I know how worried people are. Worried about their health, the health of their loved ones, their jobs, their income, their businesses, their financial security. And I know they get even more worried when they turn on their TVs and hear talk of markets collapsing and difficult times coming. People want to know what is happening and what can be done to fix it. What everyone needs to know is that we are doing everything we can to keep this country and our people healthy and financially secure. Yeah. We are clear that this is an issue above party. We will do right by you and your family, and I know I will have the support of the whole House as I say that. This House has always stood ready to come together, put aside party politics, and act in the national interest. We have done so before, and I know we will do so again. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, alongside officials and scientists, is leading the work on the public health response. Today, I want to set out our economic response, so we bring stability and security. Let me say this: we will get through this together. The British people may be worried, but they are not daunted. We will protect our country and our people. We will rise to this challenge. But let me also say, yes, this virus is the key challenge facing our country today, but it is not the only challenge. We have just had an election where people voted for change. Change in our economy, change in our public services, change in the cost of living, change in our economic geography. Yeah. This budget delivers on that change. Yeah. Yes, as we deal with coronavirus, it is a budget that provides for security today, but it is also a plan for prosperity tomorrow. Yeah. It is a budget that delivers on our promises to the British people. It is the budget of a government that gets things done. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I set out the details of our plan, let me first thank members who've contributed to the discussions on how to respond to coronavirus. Members from both sides of this House. Our economy is robust, our public finances are sound, our public services are well prepared. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is working around the clock to protect the public's health. And I will do whatever it takes to support the economy. First, let me explain the nature of the economic challenge and my overall strategy. The challenge is this: there is likely to be a temporary disruption to our economy. On the supply side, up to a fifth of the working age population could need to be off work at any one time. And business supply chains are being disrupted around the globe. This combination of people being unable to work and businesses being unable to access goods will mean that for a period, our productive capacity will shrink. There will also be an impact on the demand side of the economy through a reduction in consumer spending. The combination of those effects will have a significant impact on the UK economy, but it will be temporary. People will return to work. Supply chains will return to normal. Life will return to normal. For a period, it's going to be tough, but I'm confident that our economic performance will recover. So given this analysis of the situation, let me set out our strategy to deal with it. We can't avoid a fall in demand because the primary driver of that reduction in consumption, the primary reason that people are not spending as normal, is because they're following doctors' orders to stay at home. So the right immediate policy response is to provide security and support for those who get sick or can't work through funding our public services and a strengthened safety net. And on the supply side, the right response is to provide a bridge for businesses to ensure that what is a temporary impact on our productive capacity does not become permanent. In other words, our response will be temporary, timely, and targeted. This is the right response and at the right time. That response is clearly and closely coordinated with the Bank of England. The Governor and I have been in constant communication about the evolving situation, and our responses have been carefully designed to be complementary and to have maximum impact, consistent with our independent responsibilities. The Governor set out this morning the actions that the Bank will take to help UK businesses and households bridge across the likely economic disruption. A 50 basis point reduction to interest rates to support business and consumer confidence and cash flows. The introduction of an SME term funding scheme to help reinforce the transmission of the reduction in bank rate to the real economy. And they have released the counter-cyclical buffer to further support the ability of banks to supply credit. The government's response will use fiscal action to support public services, households, and businesses. Together, we are taking action that is coordinated, coherent, and comprehensive. And let me now set out our three-point plan. First, whatever extra resources our NHS needs to cope with coronavirus, it will get. So whether it's research for a vaccine, recruiting thousands of returning staff, or supporting our brilliant doctors and nurses, whether it's millions of pounds or billions of pounds, whatever it needs, whatever it costs, we stand behind our NHS. Second, during this immediate crisis, if people fall ill or can't work, we must support their finances. We'll make sure that our safety net remains strong enough to fall back on. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has already announced that statutory sick pay will be paid from day 1 rather than day 4. Today, with the assistance of my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, we can go further. Statutory sick pay will also be available for all those who are advised to self-isolate even if they haven't yet presented with symptoms. And rather than having to go to the doctors, you will soon be able to obtain a sick note by contacting 111. But of course, not everyone is eligible for statutory sick pay. There are millions of people working hard who are self-employed or in the gig economy. They will need our help too. So to support them during this period, we will make it quicker and easier to access benefits. Those on contributory employment and support allowance will be able to claim from day 1 instead of day 8. And to make sure that time spent off work due to sickness is reflected in your benefits, I'm also temporarily removing the minimum income floor in universal credit. And I'm relaxing the requirement for anyone to physically attend a job centre. Everything can be done by phone or online. Taken together, these measures on ESA and universal credit provide a boost of almost £500 million to our welfare system. And to further support our people, I am also creating a £500 million hardship fund distributed to local authorities who will be able to use that fund to directly support vulnerable people in their local area. So in total, that's a £1 billion commitment to support the financial security of our people. But Madam Deputy Speaker, the best way to support people is to protect their jobs. And we do that by supporting our businesses, the third part of our plan. The measures I've announced today on statutory sick pay are crucial to support those who need to take time off work. But that cost would be borne by business. And if we expect 20% of the workforce to be unable to work at any one time, the cumulative cost would hit our small and medium-sized businesses hard. So, in recognition of these exceptional circumstances, today I am taking a significant step. For businesses with fewer than 250 employees, I have decided that the cost of providing statutory sick pay to any employee off work due to coronavirus will for up to 14 days be refunded by the government in full. That could provide over £2 billion for up to 2 million businesses. This will significantly ease the burden on businesses, but we can do more. I have asked HMRC to scale up the time to pay service, allowing businesses and the self-employed to defer tax payments over an agreed period of time. Starting today, there will be a dedicated helpline with 2,000 staff standing ready to help. Now, although time to pay is important, it will still be the case that some good, well-run businesses will face problems with their cash flow. They may struggle to pay people's salaries, pay their bills, or buy new stock. They will need loans to get through this period. So today, I'm announcing a new temporary coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. Banks will offer loans of up to £1.2 million to support small and medium-sized businesses. The government will offer a generous guarantee on those loans, covering up to 80% of losses with no fees so that banks can lend with confidence. This will unlock up to £1 billion of attractive working capital loans to support small businesses with more as needed. Taken together, I expect the combination of these measures to protect the vast majority of businesses through the worst of the crisis. But I have two other measures that will use the tax system to support businesses through this. Our manifesto promised that for shops, cinemas, restaurants and music venues with a rateable value of less than £51,000, we would increase their business rates retail discount to 50%. Today, I can go further and take the exceptional step for this coming year of abolishing their business rates altogether. But there are tens of thousands of other businesses in the leisure and hospitality sectors currently not covered by this policy. Museums, art galleries and theatres, caravan parks and gyms, small hotels and B&Bs, sports clubs, nightclubs, clubhouses, guest houses, they would not benefit from today's measure, but they could be some of the hardest hit. So for this year, I have decided to extend the 100% retail discount to them as well. That means any eligible retail, leisure or hospitality business with a rateable value below £51,000 will, over the next financial year, pay no business rates whatsoever. That is a tax cut worth £1 billion, saving each business up to £25,000. And it means, over the next 12 months, nearly half of all business properties in England will not pay a penny of business rates. I'm also launching today a fundamental review to be concluded at the autumn budget into the long-term future of business rates. But even with the temporary extension of the retail discount to the leisure and hospitality sectors, many of our smallest businesses already pay no business rates, so would not benefit from this policy. So to support them to manage their fixed costs, I'm going to go a step further. I am providing to any business currently eligible for the small business rates relief a £3,000 cash grant per business. This is a £2 billion cash injection direct to 700,000 of our smallest businesses. Let me summarise for the House the fiscal impact of our immediate response to coronavirus. Taken together, the extraordinary measures I have set out today represent £7 billion to support the self-employed, businesses and vulnerable people. To support the NHS and other public services, I am also setting aside today a £5 billion emergency response fund, and I will go further if necessary. Those measures are on top of plans I will set out later in this budget, which provide an additional fiscal loosening of £18 billion to support the economy this year. That means I am announcing today, in total, a £30 billion fiscal stimulus to support British people, British jobs and British businesses through this moment. And of course, if further action is needed as the situation evolves, I hope the whole House knows I will not hesitate to act. I believe this represents one of the most comprehensive economic responses of any government anywhere in the world to date. The Governor of the Bank of England and I are in close contact with our counterparts around the world in the G7 and the G20. And to support the global response, I'm also making new funding of £150 million available for the IMF's relief efforts. Madam Deputy Speaker, coronavirus will have a significant impact on our economy, but it will be temporary. I will do whatever it takes to get our nation through it. I'm acting today with a multi-billion pound commitment. More money for our NHS, more generous sick pay, faster access to benefits if you're self-employed, extra local support for the most vulnerable, tax cuts, loans and grants for businesses to protect people's jobs. Comprehensive action, and if more is needed, I will take it. And I know all members of this House will want to give this plan their full support. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I turn to the economic forecast, I hope the House will join me in thanking the Office for Budget Responsibility and Robert Choate in particular. After 10 years, this is his last budget in charge. He's led the OBR with dedication and integrity and established that institution as one that is respected around the world. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me now turn to the growth forecasts. Since the OBR closed their forecast, it has become clear that the spread of coronavirus will have a significant impact on our economy in the coming quarters. But given that the nature of the shock is temporary, I still want to set out for the House the OBR's judgment on the economy over the medium term. Even before coronavirus hit, we were facing a slowing world economy. There has been, across developed economies, including here in the UK, a decade-long slowdown in productivity. This, combined with the political uncertainty of the last 3 years, which affected business investment in particular, has led the OBR to downgrade our productivity over the forecast period and to slightly reduce GDP growth compared to the March 2019 forecast. But while the world may slow down, we will act here with a response that is brave and bold, taking decisions now for our future prosperity. We are investing in world-class infrastructure and to lead the world in the industries and technologies of the future. The central judgment I am making today is to fund an additional £175 billion over the next 5 years for our future prosperity. The OBR have said that as a direct result of the plans that I'm announcing, growth over the next 2 years will be 0.5 percentage point higher than it otherwise would have been. For the benefit of the House, the GDP forecast, without fully accounting for the impact of coronavirus, would have led to growth of 1.1% in 2020, 1.8% in 2021, then 1.5%, 1.3% and 1.4% in the following years. And today, the OBR have made an estimate they've never made before. They have said, in their words, that today's large planned increase in public investment should boost potential output too. If future governments have the same determination to continue our approach, the UK's long-term productivity will increase by 2.5%. The OBR have confidence in the long-term future of our economy, and so do I. Madam Deputy Speaker, more investment and higher growth mean more jobs and higher wages. We already have more people working in our economy than ever before. Women's employment is at a record high, and since 2010, full-time weekly wages have grown faster in every region and nation of the UK than they have in London. The OBR expect 500,000 people more will be in work by 2025. Wages are expected to grow in real terms in every year of the forecast period. The story of this government has been the story of a national jobs miracle. And Madam Deputy Speaker, given the last few weeks I've had, I'm all in favour of jobs miracles. On inflation, the OBR forecasts 1.4% this year, increasing to 1.8% next year, and then for the rest of the forecast period remaining on or around target. And I'm sure the whole House will join me in taking the opportunity to thank Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, for his 7 years of dedicated public service. We congratulate him on his new role as Finance Advisor for COP26 and welcome his successor, Andrew Bailey, who takes up his post on Monday. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me now turn to the fiscal forecasts. The economic impacts of coronavirus remind us of the importance of fiscal responsibility. Our public finances are strong, with the deficit down from 10% in 2010 to less than 2% last year. Our economy is well prepared for the future, and it's well prepared because of 10 years of Conservative-led government and Conservative chancellors. And I too will always act responsibly with the nation's finances. But it is important that we update our fiscal framework to remain at the leading edge of international best practice. Our economic security depends on maintaining the following principles: low and stable inflation delivering price stability, fiscal sustainability, and independent, effective institutions like the Bank of England and the OBR. These features of our framework will always be protected. But there is a live global debate about what our low interest rate environment means for fiscal strategy, about the case for fiscal policy to play a more active role in stabilising the economy, and about the best ways to measure productivity-enhancing investment in the economy, such as human capital or measuring value on the public balance sheet. So I want to take time to consider these questions over the coming months, so that our fiscal framework allows us to make the right long-term decisions for our security and prosperity. I will review the if I conclude that any changes are necessary.
See the right approach.
But at the same time, credibility comes as much from what we do as what we say. We were elected on a manifesto that promised to meet a specific set of fiscal rules. Today's budget is about delivering our promises. And that's why, despite the speculation, today's budget is delivered not just within the fiscal rules in our manifesto, but with room to spare. And I'm setting the amount the government will spend for the rest of this Parliament within those rules as well. Today, the OBR report a current budget surplus in every one of the next 5 years. And in the target year of 22-23, we have fiscal space of nearly £12 billion. The OBR forecasts that borrowing will increase slightly from 2.1% of GDP in 1920 to 2.4% in 2021, 2.8% in 21-22. It then falls to 2.5%, 2.4% and 2.2% in the following years. And the OBR forecasts that headline debt will be lower at the end of the Parliament than it is today, falling from 79.5% this year to 75.2% in 24-25. I'm sure the House will understand that given how urgently we've developed our economic response to the coronavirus, that package of measures have not yet been captured in the fiscal forecast, and nor have the fiscal impacts of the bank's actions. But the House will also note that the target year for our current budget fiscal rule is not until 22-23. So even within our current framework, I have the flexibility to act as required over the next 2 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we enter a period of challenge, we start from a position of strength. The economy growing, more jobs, higher wages, stable inflation, sound public finances. We promise to manage our economies responsibly. We're getting it done. Madam Deputy Speaker, this budget responds at scale to the immediate threat of coronavirus, and it reports on an economy whose foundations are strong. It is a budget that provides for security today, but let me now outline our plan for prosperity tomorrow. This is the first budget of a new decade, the first in almost 50 years outside the European Union, and the first of this new government. At the election, we said we needed to be one nation. While talent is evenly spread, opportunity is not, and we need to fix that. This is a budget that will deliver on our promises to the British people, and it is the budget of a government that gets things done. We promised to get Brexit done, and we got it done. We promised to let hard-working families keep more of what they earn. This budget gets it done. We promised to back businesses to innovate, invest and trade. This budget gets it done. We promised to invest in science and research. This budget gets it done. We promised to deliver green growth and protect our environment. This budget gets it done. We promised to level up with new roads, railways, broadband and homes. This budget gets it done. And yes, we promised record funding for our NHS and public services. This budget gets it done. This government delivers its promises and gets things done. Madam Deputy Speaker, our plan for prosperity starts immediately by putting more money in people's pockets. It was a Conservative government that in 2016 introduced the national living wage, giving Britain's lowest paid workers the biggest pay rise in 20 years. And in just 3 weeks' time, around 2 million workers will see their wage rise again by 6.2%. For a full-time worker, that's a pay rise of almost £1,000. That is the biggest cash increase ever. But we've promised to go further. Today, we're publishing a new remit for the Independent Low Pay Commission. They now have a formal target that as long as economic conditions allow, by 2024, the national living wage will reach 2/3 of median earnings. On current forecasts, that means a living wage of over £10.50 an hour. We promised to end low pay. We're getting it done. And as people earn more, we'll also cut taxes on their wages. I am increasing in just 4 weeks' time the national insurance threshold from £8,632 to £9,500. That's a tax cut for 31 million people, saving a typical employee over £100. And taken together, our changes to the national living wage, income tax and now national insurance mean that someone working full-time on the minimum wage will be more than £5,200 better off than in 2010. The Conservatives, the real Workers' Party. I can also confirm, now that we've left the EU, that I will abolish the tampon tax. From January next year, there will be no VAT whatsoever on women's sanitary products. And I congratulate all members and right honourable members who campaigned for this, including the former member for Dewsbury who led the charge. Now let me turn to duties. Scotch whisky is a crucial industry and our largest food and drink export. My Scottish Conservative colleagues, including my honourable friend, the member for Moray, have highlighted to me the impact that the recent US tariffs are having. We will continue to lobby the US government to remove these harmful tariffs. But in the meantime, I'm announcing today £1 million of support to promote Scottish food and drink overseas and £10 million of new R&D funding to help distilleries go green. And to further support the industry, I can also announce that this year the planned increase in spirits duty will be cancelled. Madam Deputy Speaker, pubs are at the centre of community life. Madam Deputy Speaker, pubs are at the centre of community life, but too many have closed over the past decade. We're already promised to introduce a business rates pubs discount of £1,000 for small pubs. But I've heard calls from many honourable and right honourable members, including my honourable friend, the member for Dudley South, that we need to do more, especially given the possible impact of coronavirus on our pubs. So today, I can announce that exceptionally for this year, the business rate discount for pubs will not be £1,000, it will be £5,000. And I'm also pleased to announce that the planned rise in beer duty will also be cancelled. And because of decisions I've taken elsewhere in this budget, I am also freezing duties for cider and wine drinkers as well. For only the second time in almost 20 years, that's every single one of our alcohol duties frozen. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have heard representations that after 9 years of being frozen, at a cost of £110 billion to the taxpayer, we can no longer afford to freeze fuel duty. I'm certainly mindful of the fiscal cost and the environmental impacts, but I'm taking considerable steps in this budget to incentivise cleaner forms of transportation, and many people still rely on their cars. So I'm pleased to announce today that for another year, fuel duty will remain frozen. Compared to 2010 plans, that's a saving of £1,200. Madam Deputy Speaker, wages up, national insurance cut, the tampon tax abolished, spirits duty frozen, beer duty frozen, wine and cider duty frozen, fuel duty frozen. We promised to cut taxes and the cost of living, and we got it done. Madam Deputy Speaker, as Conservatives, we know that to put more money in people's pockets, we need a thriving private sector. That is what drives growth. That is what creates jobs. That is what lifts living standards. So the second part of our plan for prosperity is to unleash the power of business. Businesses need support to start up, grow and export. So today I provide £130 million of new funding to extend start-up loans, £200 million for the British Business Bank to invest in scale-ups, another £200 million for life sciences, more money for growth hubs, 21 cities with British Library business support, £5 billion of new export loans for business, and dedicated trade envoys representing the North, the Midlands, Wales and the West of England in our embassies around the world. Madam Deputy Speaker, businesses also need a fair tax system. We were elected on a manifesto that promised to review and reform entrepreneurs' relief. I've now completed that review, and here's what we're going to do. Entrepreneurs' relief is expensive at a cost of over £2 billion per year, ineffective with less than 1 in 10 claimants saying the relief was an incentive to set up their business, and unfair with nearly 3/4 of the cost going to just 5,000 individuals. Just because it's called Entrepreneurs Relief doesn't mean that it's entrepreneurs who mainly benefit. For all these reasons, I've heard representations that I should completely abolish it. The Institute of Fiscal Studies have criticised it. The Resolution Foundation called it the UK's worst tax break. And I'm sympathetic to that argument. But at the same time, we shouldn't discourage those genuine entrepreneurs who do rely on the relief. We need more risk-taking and creativity in this country, not less. So I have decided not to fully abolish Entrepreneurs Relief today. Instead, I will do what the Federation of Small Businesses called a sensible reform and reduce the lifetime limit from £10 million to £1 million. 80% of small business owners are unaffected by today's changes. Those reforms save £6 billion over the next 5 years, and I'm giving almost all of that money straight back to business through 3 additional measures. The research and development expenditure credit will be increased from 12 to 13%, a tax cut worth £2,400 on a typical R&D claim. The structures and buildings allowance will be increased from 2% to 3%, giving an extra £100,000 of relief if you're investing in a building worth £10 million. And to cut taxes on employment, I will deliver our promise to increase the employment allowance by a third to £4,000. That's a tax cut this April for nearly 500,000 small businesses. Another step towards a dynamic, low-tax economy we want to see. Madam Deputy Speaker, we promised to cut taxes on business. We're getting it done. Madam Deputy Speaker, to help our businesses lead the next generation of high productivity industries, we also need to invest now in the technologies of the future. We are a country of Newton, Hodgkin and Turing. Ours is a history filled with ideas, invention and discovery, and is truly a national history. The first steam railway ran between Stockton and Darlington. The first television was invented by a Scot. A Welshman invented the first hydrogen fuel cell, and Jocelyn Bell Burnell, born in Northern Ireland, discovered the first radio pulsars. To compete and succeed over the next decade and beyond, we need to recapture that spirit. So the third part of our plan for prosperity is to invest in ideas. Madam Deputy Speaker, in our manifesto, we made a promise to double investment in research and development to £18 billion. I will not be doing this today. Instead, I will increase investment in R&D to £22 billion a year. That is the fastest and largest increase in R&D spend ever. As a percentage of GDP, it will be the highest in nearly 40 years, higher than the US, China, France and Japan, and a major step towards our target of increasing public and private investment in R&D to 2.4% of GDP. And we won't wait to get started. Next year, funding will grow by 15%, the fastest year-on-year growth on record. Detailed allocations of our investment in ideas will be set out at the spending review, but I can make some announcements today. I'm investing £1.4 billion in our world-leading Science Institute at Weybridge, where, as we speak, they're working to analyse samples of coronavirus. To secure our leadership in the technologies of the future, I'm investing over £900 million in nuclear fusion, space and electric vehicles. And as we invest in ideas, we're also changing the way we fund science in this country. I can confirm that we will invest at least £800 million in a new Blue Skies funding agency here in the UK, modelled on the extraordinary ARPA in the US. And as we invest in ideas, we're also changing where we fund science in this country. Today, half of R&D funding goes to London, the East and the South East of England. So we're investing £400 million of new funding into high-quality research, with much of that incremental funding going to our brilliant universities around this country. We promise to make this country one of the scientific research centres of the world. We're getting it done. Madam Deputy Speaker, there can be no lasting prosperity for our people if we do not protect our planet. So the fourth part of our plan for prosperity is to create the high-skill, high-wage, low-carbon jobs of the future. To level up with completely new industries in our regions and nations, to raise our productivity and lift our quality of life even as we cut our emissions. The Treasury's Net Zero review will set out the government's strategic choices ahead of COP26 later this year. Today's budget takes the first steps. First, we will increase taxes on pollution. Electricity is now a cleaner energy form than gas, but our climate change levy, paid by companies, taxes electricity at a higher rate. So as another step towards equalising the rates and encouraging energy efficiency, from April 2022, I'm freezing the levy on electricity and raising it on gas. I will support the most energy-intensive industries to transition to net zero by extending the Climate Change Agreement Scheme for a further 2 years. To tackle the scourge of plastic waste, we will deliver our manifesto promise to introduce a new plastic packaging tax. From April 2022, we will charge manufacturers and importers £200 per tonne on packaging made of less than 30% recycled plastic. That will increase the use of recycled plastic in packaging by 40%, equal to carbon savings of nearly 200,000 tonnes. Let me now turn to red diesel. The red diesel scheme allows selected users to pay duty of just over 11 pence per litre for diesel, compared to almost 58 pence per litre for everyone else. But the sectors using red diesel are some of the biggest contributors to our air quality problem, emitting nearly 10% of the noxious gases polluting the air of our cities like London. This is a tax relief on nearly 14 million tonnes of carbon dioxide every year, the same as the entire population of London and Greater Manchester taking a return flight to New York. It's been a £2.4 billion tax break for pollution that's also hindered the development of cleaner alternatives. So I will abolish the tax relief for most sectors. That's the right thing to do, but I recognise it will be a big change for some industries. So firstly, this change will not take effect for 2 years, giving businesses time to prepare. Secondly, I have heard the concerns about agriculture, particularly from the NFU rural colleagues, and indeed my right honourable friend, the member for Sherwood. So I have decided that agriculture will retain the relief. I'll I'll also keep the relief for rail, for domestic heating, and there will be no impact on fishing. We'll consult over the summer with other sectors. And thirdly, to help develop cleaner alternatives to red diesel and other fossil fuels, we will more than double R&D investment in the Energy Innovation Programme to £1 billion. Now, as well as taxing pollution, we will invest and cut taxes on clean transport. We're introducing a comprehensive package of tax and spend reforms to make it cheaper to buy zero or low emission cars, vans, motorbikes and taxis. We're investing £300 million in tackling nitrogen dioxide emissions in towns and cities across England. And we're investing £500 million to support the rollout of new rapid charging hubs so that drivers are never more than 30 miles away from being able to charge up their car. Taken together, this budget invests £1 billion in green transport solutions. Madam Deputy Speaker, many members around this House will have seen the devastating impact of the recent floods on homes and businesses in their own constituencies. And particularly the Honourable Member for Barnsley East, my honourable friends, the members for Calder Valley and Telford, my right honourable friend, the member for Ludlow. So I can announce today that I'm making £120 million available immediately to repair all defences damaged in the winter floods. To support those areas that have been repeatedly flooded, I am also providing £200 million of funding directly to local communities to build their flood resilience. And to protect people and over 300,000 properties, I'm doubling our investment in flood defences over the next 6 years to £5.2 billion. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're also supporting natural habitats like woodlands and peat bogs. I can confirm today that to protect, restore and expand these wonderful habitats and capture carbon, we will provide £640 million for a new Nature for Climate fund. Over the next 5 years, we will plant around 30,000 hectares of trees. That's a forest larger than Birmingham, and restore 35,000 hectares of peatland. This government intends to be the first in history to leave our natural environment in a better state than we found it. Madam Deputy Speaker, I can make one further announcement on green growth. Carbon capture and storage is precisely the kind of exciting technology where Britain can lead the world over the next decade. I can announce today that we will invest at least £800 million to establish 2 or more new carbon capture storage clusters by 2030. Once up and running, these clusters will store millions of tonnes of carbon dioxide that otherwise would have been released into the atmosphere. New clusters will areas like Teesside, Humberside, Merseyside or St Fergus in Scotland. It's levelling up in action. Madam Deputy Speaker, green jobs, better flood defences, cheaper electric vehicle, opportunity to upgrade, to improve, to enhance, to level up. That starts today with the next part of our plan as we get Britain building. Madam Deputy Speaker, over the next 5 years, we will invest more than £600 billion in our future prosperity. Public net investment will, in real terms, be the highest it's been since 1955. Take the average amount we've invested over the last 40 years in real terms, we're tripling it. Capital budgets in 24-25 alone will reach over £110 billion. I will set out the detailed capital allocations at the spending review, but I'm taking 3 major steps today. First, we're going to change the whole mindset of government to make sure economic decision-making reflects the economic geography of the country. We're reviewing the Treasury's Green Book. We'll have Treasury offices in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And I can announce today that we're also opening a new economic campus in the north with over 750 staff from the Treasury, the Departments for Business, Local Government and Trade. And we won't stop there. Our ultimate ambition is to move 22,000 civil servants outside central London. Second, because of this changed mindset, we will invest more in our nation's cities and towns. Today's budget provides an extra £640 million for the Scottish Government, £360 million for the Welsh Government, and £210 million for the Northern Ireland Executive. I'm announcing £242 million of funding for new city and growth deals, taking our investment in these deals to more than £2.7 billion. We've agreed today a new devolution deal in West Yorkshire with a directly elected mayor for the region. And to make sure that it isn't just Londoners who benefit from the kind of long-term transport deal that helped TfL, I'm announcing today that the new West Yorkshire mayor will, along with the 7 other Metro mayors, get new London-style funding settlements worth £4.2 billion. These settlements are in addition to the Transforming Cities Fund, which will invest over £1 billion in local transport in 12 further cities, including Stoke, Preston, Derby, Nottingham and Southampton. Third, we're going to build broadband, railway, roads. If the country needs it, we will build it. Today's budget provides £5 billion to get gigabit-capable broadband into the hardest-reached places, and £510 million of new investment into the shared rural phone network, which means that in the next 5 years, 4G coverage will reach 95% of our country. And let me thank my right honourable friend, the Culture Secretary, who will get this done. We're also going to build better railways, Madam Deputy Speaker, with spades going into the ground on HS2, our commitment to fund Manchester Leeds leg of Northern Powerhouse Rail, funding today for a new station at Cambridge South and the Midlands Rail Hub, Darlington Station moving to the next stage of development and approval, and funding to make dozen train stations more accessible. And there's more money for our roads too. Today, I'm announcing the biggest ever investment in strategic roads and motorway, over £27 billion of tarmac. That will pay for work on over 20 connections to ports and airports, over 100 junctions, and over 4,000 miles of road. I'm also announcing new investment in local roads, alongside a new £2.5 billion pothole fund. That's £500 million every single year, enough to fill by the end of this Parliament 50 million potholes. The details of all these road schemes that I'm funding will be published later today, and I thank my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, for all his efforts. Our ambition is truly national. The A417 in the southwest, the A428 in the east, the A46 in the Midlands, unclogging Manchester's arteries, freeing the traffic north of Newcastle, and something my North and Mid Wales colleagues will be particularly pleased to hear: we're protecting beautiful villages in the Welsh borders as we finally build the Pant-Llanelli-Monach bypass.
Well done.
We promised to get Britain moving, and we're getting it done. There's one more road I'd like to mention. It's one of our most important regional arteries. It is one of those totemic projects symbolising delay and obstruction. Governments have been trying to fix it since the 1980s. Every year, millions of cars crawl along it in traffic, ruining the backdrop to one of our most important historic landmarks. So to the many honourable and right honourable members who have campaigned for this moment, I say this: the A303, this government's going to get it done. Madam Deputy Speaker, today we've announced the biggest programme of public investment ever. £27 billion for strategic roads this Parliament, funding to fill 50 million potholes, new railways, new stations, £5 billion for broadband, a new mayor for West Yorkshire, investment in every region and every nation of our United Kingdom. We promised to get Britain building. This budget is getting it done. Madam Deputy Speaker, only by having a plan for prosperity will we grow the economy. Only by having a growing economy can we invest in our public services. And only by investing in our public services, the people's priority, can we send a clear message to those who rely on them. You are our priority. Our public services are one of the most important tools by which we, the government, can level up and spread opportunity, so that no matter who you are or where you were born, you will have every chance to succeed in our modern dynamic economy. And that starts with education. We've already provided schools with a 3-year settlement worth over £7 billion by 2022. My right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, is taking forward our plans to increase per pupil funding next year by an average of over 4%. Today, I'm providing every region in the country with funding for specialist 16 to 19 maths schools, £25,000 per year on average for each secondary school to invest in arts activities, £30 million a year to improve PE teaching, and £8 million for the Football Foundation scheme to build new pitches for around 300,000 people to play on. And to support families, I'm providing £2.5 million to fund research into how best to integrate family services, including family hubs championed by my honourable friend, the member for Congleton. Next, I'd like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to my predecessor and friend, the Right Honourable Member for Bromsgrove. One of the issues he is most passionate about is levelling up further education. At the spending round, he increased funding for 16 to 19 education by £400 million. Today, I can secure his legacy with £1.5 billion of new capital over 5 years to dramatically improve the condition of our entire FE College estate. My predecessor wanted to level up further education. Saj, we're getting it done. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have one final education announcement. I've talked today about Britain being the country of scientists, inventors and engineers. But we're also the country of Shakespeare, Austen and Dahl. Our greatest export to the world is our language. Our greatest asset is the free exchange of ideas and debate. And our greatest responsibility is the education of our young people. A world-class education will help the next generation thrive, and nothing could be more fundamental to that than reading. And yet digital publications are subject to VAT. That can't be right. So today, I am abolishing the reading tax. From the 1st of December, just in time for Christmas, books, newspapers, magazines or academic journals, however they are read, will have no VAT charge whatsoever. There will be no VAT on historical fiction by Hilary Mantel, manuals or textbooks like Gray's Anatomy, or indeed works of fantasy like John MacDonald's Economics for the Many. The irony is, it sold so few, it's literally his own little red book. Madam Deputy Speaker, our second priority is to make sure people have affordable and safe housing. Today, I can make good our promise to extend the Affordable Homes programme with a new multi-year settlement of £12 billion. This will be the largest cash investment in affordable housing in a decade. To support local authorities to invest in their communities, I'm cutting interest rates on lending for social housing by 1 percentage point, making available more than £1 billion of discounted loans for local infrastructure and consulting on the future of the Public Works Loan Board. I'm confirming nearly £1.1 billion of allocations from the Housing Infrastructure Fund to build nearly 70,000 homes in areas of high demand across our country. A new £400 million fund for ambitious mayors like Andy Street in the West Midlands to build on brownfield sites. And tomorrow, my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, will set out for the House comprehensive reforms to bring our planning system into the 21st century. But the housing challenge is most acutely felt by those with no home at all. So today, I'm confirming £650 million of funding to help rough sleepers into permanent accommodation. That will buy up to 6,000 new places for people to live, enable a step change in support services, and help us meet our promise to end rough sleeping in this Parliament. And to fund those rough sleeping measures, I'm confirming today that our manifesto promise to introduce a new stamp duty surcharge for non-UK residents will be introduced at a rate of 2% from April 2021. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have one further measure to announce on housing. 2.5 years on, we're still grappling with the tragic legacy of Grenfell. Last year, we allocated £600 million to remove unsafe aluminium composite material, or ACM, from high-rise residential buildings. Today, I go further. Expert advice is clear that new public funding must concentrate on removing unsafe materials from high-rise residential buildings. So today, I am creating a new building safety fund worth £1 billion. That is what the experts have called for. That is what the Select Committee has called for. That is even what the opposition have called for. That new fund will go beyond dealing with ACM to make sure that all unsafe combustible cladding will be removed from every private and social residential building above 18 metres high. And my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, will spearhead our efforts to make sure developers and building owners do their fair share as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is no more cherished public service than our NHS. Whatever resources the NHS needs to deal with coronavirus, it will get. We all benefit from a thriving health service, so it is right that we ask everyone to contribute. Business benefits from our NHS. So as promised in our manifesto, the corporation tax rate will not be cut this year, but will remain at 19%, still the lowest rate in the G20. Migrants benefit from our NHS, and we all want them to do so. But it's right that what people get out, they also put in. There is a surcharge already, but it doesn't properly reflect the benefits that people receive. So as we promised in our manifesto, we are increasing the immigration health surcharge to £624 with a discounted rate for children. To raise further funds for the NHS, I'm announcing a package of measures today to clamp down on aggressive tax avoidance, evasion and non-compliance, including extra funding for HMRC to secure £4.4 billion of additional revenue. And those extra contributions allow me to take 3 further steps to support our health services. First, mental health support can be critical for many people, and particularly for our veterans. Thanks to the campaigning from my honourable friend, the member for Wolverhampton South West, and my right honourable friend, the member for Harwich and North Essex, I will be supporting veterans with mental health needs with a £10 million donation to the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. And I'm also confirming today that to encourage employers to provide veterans with job opportunities, will introduce a new national insurance relief. Second, I've listened to concerns from all sides of this House that the pensions tax system is preventing doctors from taking on more hours. To significantly reduce the number of people that the tapered annual allowance affects, I am increasing both taper thresholds by £90,000, removing anyone with income below £200,000. Based on their vital work for the NHS, that will take around 98% of consultants and 96% of GPs out of the taper altogether. At the same time, I'm reducing the minimum annual allowance to £4,000, which will only impact those with incomes above £300,000. This is a £2 billion commitment that supports our hard-working doctors. Let me turn now to the overall funding settlement for the NHS. We've already provided the NHS with a record funding increase, £34 billion over 5 years, the biggest cash increase in public services since the Second World War. Today, I can go further. I can announce over £6 billion of new funding in this Parliament to support the NHS. That new money will deliver 50,000 more nurses, 50 million more GP surgery appointments, and work starting on 40 new hospitals. You heard that right, 40 new hospitals. We promised to back the NHS, and this budget gets it done. I have one last point to make about public services. We have now left the EU. We promised to get Brexit done, and we got it done. We promised to regain control of the money we send to Brussels, and for the first time ever, today's OBR forecast shows that the billions of pounds we would have sent to the EU can now be spent on our priorities. Today, I'm launching the next spending review to conclude in July, setting out detailed spending plans for the Parliament. Let me set out for the House our new totals for public spending on public services. The OBR have said that today's budget will be the largest sustained fiscal boost for nearly 30 years. Next year, day-to-day departmental spending will grow at the fastest rate in 15 years. Over the spending review period, it's set to grow at the fastest rate since 2004, an average growth rate in real terms of 2.8%, twice as fast as the economy. That means that by the end of this Parliament, day-to-day spending on public services will be £100 billion higher in cash terms than it is today. More police, safer streets, more nurses, better healthcare, more teachers, better education. Madam Deputy Speaker, the House now knows what the electorate already knows. The Conservatives are the party of public services. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are at the beginning of a new era in this country. We have the freedom and the resources to decide our own future, a future where we unleash the energy, inventiveness and creativity of all the British people, and a future where we look outwards and are confident on the world stage. That starts right now with our world-leading response to the coronavirus. This is a budget delivered in challenging times. We will rise to this moment. We will get through this together. This budget delivers security today, but it also lays the foundations for prosperity tomorrow. This is just the start. Over the next few months, we'll tackle the big issues head on, from our national infrastructure strategy to social care and further devolution. This is the budget of a government that gets things done. Creating jobs, cutting taxes, keeping the cost of living low, investing in our NHS, investing in our public services, investing in ideas, backing business, protecting our environment, building roads, building railways, building colleges, building houses, building our union. A budget that delivers on our promises, a people's budget from a people's government, and I commend it to this House.
Thank you. Under Standing Order number 51, the first motion, entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes, must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move formally? The question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. A. Rates of tobacco products duty, motion number 40. And B. Vehicle excise duty motor caravans, motion number 44. As many as that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the motion entitled Income Tax Charge. It's on this motion that the debate will take place today and on the succeeding days. The questions on this motion and on the remaining motions will, of course, be put at the end of the budget debate next Tuesday, the 17th of March. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the motion formally. The question is that income tax is charged for the tax year 2020 to 21, and it is declared that it is expedient and in the public interest that this resolution should have statutory effect under the provisions of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968. And to reply to the budget, I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The coronavirus outbreak is an emergency, and so I want to make it clear that we have to work together, all of us, to meet this head-on and to overcome it. But we'll only overcome this virus because of the dedication of our NHS staff, carers and public servants. The steps the government has announced today to head off the economic impact of the coronavirus are obviously welcome, but I have some points I wish to raise. We have to be straight with people. It is going to be much tougher because of the last 10 years of deeply damaging and counterproductive cuts to all of our essential public services. We're going into this crisis with our public services on their knees. And as today's figures confirm, with a fundamentally weak economy, which is now flatlining, with zero growth even before the impact of coronavirus. Today's budget was billed as a turning point, a chance to deliver, in particular on the promises made to working class communities during the general election. But it doesn't come close. The government's boast of the biggest investment since the 1950s is frankly a sleight of hand. It's in fact only the biggest since they began their slash and burn assault on our services, economic infrastructure and living standards in 2010. And having ruthlessly forced down the living standards and life chances of millions of our people for a decade, the talk of levelling up is a cruel joke. The reality is that this is a budget which has an admission of failure, an admission that austerity has been a failed experiment. It didn't solve our economic problems, but made them worse, that held back our own recovery and failed even in its own terms. And today's measures go nowhere near reversing the damage that has been done to our country. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will wish the Honourable Member for Mid-Bedfordshire well. Many people are understandably very worried about the impact of coronavirus on their own lives. The government needs to be very clear what it is announcing, and there are still questions to be answered about the government's response. What coverage is there for people on 0 hours contracts or those without a contract of employment beyond reforms to benefits? Will statutory sick pay adjustments announced today be available to all workers from day one? What support will be made available for low-paid workers who don't meet the lower earnings limit for statutory sick pay? Are there any plans to increase the level of statutory sick pay, which itself is actually scandalously low? Will people who are doing the right thing by self-isolating continue to be punished with a 5-week wait for universal credit payments? The benefit system can't be only to support for millions of workers not entitled to statutory sick pay. The crisis is exposing the vulnerabilities in our economy and our public services. When 17,000 National Health Service beds have been cut, leaving 94% of the remaining beds full, when 100,000 people were forced to wait more than 4 hours on trolleys in A&E departments in January, it's little wonder people worry that the extra money for the health service is too little, too late. We only have a quarter of the intensive care beds per person that Germany has. We don't have enough ventilators to deal with a mass outbreak or the people with the necessary trained skills to operate those ventilators. Across the National Health Service, there are at this moment 100,000 staff vacancies. And moreover, public health budgets have been slashed by £1 billion in recent years. What an irony. Public health is based on the principle that prevention is better than cure. But this government is providing money only after a serious outbreak is underway. We know that the most vulnerable people to coronavirus are older people. That is when we need a strong social care system. But social care is in crisis. There's an £8 billion funding gap since 2010. Instead of the government presenting a social care plan, which the part-time Prime Minister told us was ready long ago, they're asking the rest of us to come up with ideas. Underpaid care workers, a quarter of them, on 0 hours contracts, travel from house to house to provide care to elderly and sick people. It's a model that could scarcely be better designed to encourage the spread of a virus. So it is vital that the government doesn't wait a few months but comes up now with answers to ensure that care workers do not lose out for staying away from work if they experience the symptoms. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor shows a lot of brass neck when he boasts that measures to deal with coronavirus are only possible because of his party's management of the economy. Look outside. In the rest of the world, in the real world, we're still living through the slowest economic recovery in a century. Our economy is fundamentally weak. ONS figures out today show the economy is not growing. Growth was 0.0% in the 3 months to January. 0.0% in the 3 months to the end of January. The Prime Minister might find this funny. Those struggling don't. Future growth has been downgraded yet again, from 1.4% to 1.1% this year. And that is before coronavirus has been taken into account. We have stalling productivity, flatlining business investment, and wages of only just scraped past pre-crisis levels. None of this can be blamed on coronavirus, and it isn't all because of Brexit either. It's because they have failed on the economy. That failure has left us the most regionally unequal country in Europe. Investment spending per head in London is currently more than double that of the East Midlands. And now they talk about levelling up. But who pushed huge swathes of our country so low in the first place? It's Conservative governments that have starved the country of investment over the last 10 years, resulting in a £192 billion hole in infrastructure spending. What has that meant for people? It's meant bus services have been cut. There is patchy access to broadband. Homes and businesses ruined because of inadequate flood defences. The Chancellor expects plaudits for half filling the investment hole his party created in the first place. Amid a blizzard of hype, he's claiming today marks the biggest capital injection since the 1950s. But, Mr. Speaker, this is actually all smoke and mirrors. As a percentage of GDP, it only returns us to the levels we had before the Conservatives slashed investment so drastically in 2010. Given the challenge of the coronavirus crisis, we need a far-reaching reaction to strengthen and stabilise our economy and ensure we are in the strongest position possible to navigate the transition to new relationships with the EU and a post-Brexit economy and the trade deals that will enable that to happen. If the government truly wanted to level up after Brexit, there is only one thing they should be doing above all else: a green industrial revolution. They would have a plan to kickstart new green industries and create skilled jobs all across our country. The climate emergency threatens our very existence. It demands we mobilise our resources on a massive scale. The environmental measures announced by the Chancellor today get nowhere near that. The government has maintained the freeze on fuel duty without lowering bus and rail fares, showing complacency about the climate emergency. Young people especially will be dismayed at the lack of urgency to reduce our emissions. They rightly see this as the Conservatives once again putting the profits of big polluters and oil companies above people's safety and well-being. And when the Chancellor announced with such aplomb a huge investment in road building across the country, where is the environmental impact assessment being made of that policy, or the increased pollution that will come from increased car use and traffic across this country? Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, today's budget confirms that austerity has not worked, even in its own terms. We've had a decade of decline. Austerity has cost the UK economy almost £100 billion, according to the New Economics Foundation. But the true cost is incalculable. I want to give the House an example to bring that home. Errol Graham was an amateur footballer when he was young. By his mid-50s, suffering from mental health issues, he had become reclusive, unable to leave his flat in Nottingham, terrified of the world outside. He couldn't attend his fitness for work assessment, so, because of the government's harsh and very uncaring attitude, his benefits were cut off. With no income for food, he obviously began to go hungry. He wrote a desperate letter to his DWP assessor. "Judge me fairly," he wrote. "It's not nice living this way." Errol weighed 4.5 stone when the bailiffs found his body inside his flat. He had starved to death in this, the 5th richest country in the world. When the Chancellor talks about difficult decisions the government took in imposing austerity, is he thinking of decisions to deprive Errol of his income, or people like Errol who are going through such traumas in their life? And the worst thing is, austerity, all of this suffering, has been a political choice, not an economic necessity. The party opposite continues to make the absurd claim that austerity was needed because spending on schools, hospitals and public services by Labour somehow was the cause of the worldwide financial crash in 2008. A US Senate report into the root causes of the crash singled out two investment banks to blame: Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank. A few weeks ago, the Prime Minister turfed out one Chancellor who had previously worked at Deutsche Bank and replaced him with another one who worked at Goldman Sachs. Truly a government of the people. Now, Mr. Speaker, they want us to believe that austerity is over. But it's not true. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, it would take at least $54 billion of current spending this year, excluding health and social care, to get us back to 2010 levels. We've heard nothing even approaching that scale from the Chancellor today. Without it, the IFS says austerity is baked into our economy. And try telling local councils, which face a further £8 billion black hole over this Parliament, that austerity is over. Mr. Speaker, to truly end austerity and fund urgent action on the climate emergency and our public services, we need a fair taxation system. That means making the richest pay their share. But the government's changes to the national insurance threshold will actually mostly benefit higher earners, while those on lower incomes would be far better supported by boosting wages and real social security. The income of the poorest fifth of families has fallen by 7% in just 2 years. And as the Resolution Foundation has said, this has been driven by policy choices. How can it be right that 12 years after the bankers crashed the economy, the poorest 20% of the population are still being made to pay for it, while those at the top are being rewarded yet again? And today we learn they won't even scrap entrepreneurs' relief, a huge subsidy mainly benefiting 5,000 people who make an average of £350,000 per year. I can only assume those who fund the Conservative Party have had a quiet word with the Chancellor and told him to back off. Creating a fair taxation system also means tackling tax avoidance and evasion. How can we have confidence in this Chancellor to clamp down on tax dodgers when he previously worked for hedge funds that used the Cayman Islands and had a very close business associate who engaged in a multi-million-pound tax avoidance scheme? And how can we have confidence when the government's big idea is apparently free ports, tax-free zones to allow the super-rich to dodge taxes and take away workers' protections? Mr. Speaker, the last Chancellor resigned, saying that no self-respecting minister could accept being controlled by advisers in Number 10. The new Chancellor accepted that control and now he's presented a budget just 27 days after taking the job. So can I, through him and the chuntering Prime Minister, pass on our congratulations to Dominic Cummings on writing a budget so quickly? But what a letdown it's been. When I first responded to a budget, austerity was very much in the vogue, and our demands for investment and spending were dismissed. The terrain of public debate has shifted dramatically in just a few years, but there's a gaping chasm between the rhetoric of the Conservative Party have adopted and the reality of what they delivered. Because the Conservative Party, whatever they say, will never stand up for working class communities. They will always put the interests of their wealthy friends first. The reality of today's announcements will become clear, and the hard sell and the spin will fade away, and this budget will then be seen to be a lost opportunity, a failure of ambition and a bitter disappointment to all those people who had been promised so much. But from what we've heard today, they're actually going to see very, very little.
Order. Call the Chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, Mell Stride.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is no doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this budget has been framed against one of the most challenging moments in this country's economic history. And it is true, as the Chancellor has set out, that there are many fundamentals of our economy that are strong. Record levels of employment, the lowest level of unemployment since 19...
Not the Honourable Gentleman, but I will do so in order that people can leave quietly so that the Honourable Gentleman can be heard. Mell Stride.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the lowest level of unemployment since 1974. Inflation low and stable, and real wages rising, and having done so over a period of 2 years. But the Chancellor is equally right to point to the huge challenges that lay ahead. He did not mention, in fact, the trade deal that we are negotiating with the European Union, nor, of course, explicitly the many challenges there will be around